The day my father walked into my spa and demanded I hand over half of everything I'd built, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because 7 years ago, he was the one who told me I was dead to him. Let me back up. I grew up in a house where love had conditions attached to it, and I didn't figure that out until it was almost too late. My father ran a small but successful landscaping company in Columbus, Ohio, the kind of business that gets passed down through the family like a piece of furniture, whether you want it or not. He built it over 30 years, and he was proud of it the way some men are proud of their cars. It defined him. It was supposed to define all of us. I was the second of 3 kids. My older brother, whose name I'll just say starts with a T, was the golden one from the day he was born. My younger sister was the baby, which came with its own kind of armor. And then there was me, stuck in the middle, the one who asked too many questions and had too many opinions and never quite fit the mold my father had already cast before I showed up. My mother was kind but quiet. She had learned early on that keeping the peace meant staying small, and she passed that lesson on to us kids whether she meant to or not. I loved her. I still do. But she was never going to stand between my father and anything he decided, and I knew that by the time I was 12 years old. I was good at school, not just decent. I was the kind of student that teachers pull aside after class and say, "You should think about where you want to go with this." I wanted to study interior design and business. I had this vision, even at 17, of running my own space someday, something beautiful and calm that I built myself. My father thought that was ridiculous. He wanted me in the landscaping business behind a desk, doing the books. I told him that wasn't what I wanted. That was the beginning of the end, though I didn't know it at the time. I applied to schools anyway. Got into a program in Cincinnati that had a strong design track. I had a partial scholarship, and I assumed the rest would come from the college fund my parents had been putting money into since I was born. The same fund they'd used for my brother's business degree 2 years earlier, without a single conversation about it. The conversation I had with my father the summer before I left is one I've replayed more times than I can count. He sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd had every hard conversation in that house, and he told me that the money was gone. Not gone like it had been spent on something else, gone like it had been redistributed. He had pulled it out and put it into the business, specifically into a new truck fleet and equipment upgrade that my brother had pushed for. My brother, who was now a junior partner in the company. My brother, who my father had decided was the future of everything he'd built. I sat there for a long time without saying anything. Then I asked him when he was planning to tell me. He said he was telling me now. I asked if there was any other plan, any loan, any bridge to help me get through school. He looked at me with this expression I still can't fully describe, not cruel exactly, but final, and said, "You'll figure something out. You always do." I was 19 years old. I moved to Cincinnati anyway. I took out federal loans for what I could. I worked nights at a hotel front desk and weekends at a home goods store where I learned more about what people actually wanted in their living spaces than I ever could have in a classroom. I ate a lot of rice and eggs and ramen. I slept 6 hours a night for 3 years, and I did not complain about it to anyone because complaining felt like proving my father right. I came home for Thanksgiving my sophomore year. My father and I got into an argument. I honestly don't even remember what started it. Something small, something that in any other family would have dissolved into awkward silence and then pie. But in our family, small arguments were just the surface of bigger ones, and this one cracked all the way through. He said things. I said things back. And then he said the sentence that I have never forgotten. "If you walk out that door, don't bother coming back." I walked out. I didn't go back. Not for Thanksgiving, not for Christmas, not when my grandmother had her hip surgery, not when my sister graduated high school. I sent a card for that one. She never acknowledged it. My mother called me twice in the first year, both times short, strained conversations where she said she hoped I was okay and that I should give my father time. After that, the calls stopped. I was 20 years old and my family had gone quiet, like a radio someone had turned off in the middle of a song. I graduated. I was 22, carrying more debt than I wanted to think about, and I had a degree in interior design and business and approximately nothing else. I got a job at a day spa in Cincinnati doing administrative work, booking, inventory, vendor management. It wasn't glamorous, but I was good at it, and I paid attention to everything. How the front desk shaped the customer's first impression. How lighting changed the way a room felt. How the difference between a spa that felt like a chore and one that felt like an escape was almost entirely in the details. I worked there for 2 years. Then I moved to Nashville because a woman I'd met at a trade conference told me the wellness market there was growing faster than anywhere in the Southeast, and she wasn't wrong. I got a job managing operations at a mid-range spa in Green Hills. Saved aggressively, lived in a small apartment with one roommate, stopped buying things I didn't need, read everything I could about small business ownership, commercial leasing, and the spa industry specifically. The part that people always find hard to believe, and I understand why because I know how it sounds, is that I got my start with a combination of 3 things: a small business loan through an SBA program, a private investment from a woman named Margaret who had been a regular client at the spa where I worked and who believed in what I was trying to do, and a commercial lease on a space in East Nashville that the previous tenant had just vacated in a hurry, which meant the landlord was motivated and the rent was negotiable. None of it was luck exactly. It was more like years of showing up every single day until the right doors happened to be open at the same time. I opened Soleil Wellness in the spring, 3 years after moving to Nashville. It was a boutique spa, 6 treatment rooms, a small retail section, and a tea lounge in the front that people kept coming back to even when they didn't have appointments. I had designed every corner of it myself. The lighting, the materials, the scent in the air when you walked through the door. It was the most personal thing I had ever made. In the first year, we broke even. In the second, we turned a modest profit. By year 3, Soleil had a wait list for weekend appointments, and I had opened a second location in the Gulch. I had also, quietly, begun investing the profit in commercial real estate. Small at first, a retail strip, then a mixed-use building in Germantown. I had a good accountant and a better attorney, and I was careful and unglamorous about all of it. I am telling you this because I want you to understand that none of it was handed to me. Every dollar came from somewhere I could point to. Every decision was mine. 7 years passed. 7 years of building, of missing holidays I had pretended didn't matter to me anymore, of occasionally seeing a post on social media from someone back home and feeling something that wasn't quite grief, but lived in the same neighborhood. I had friends who knew me well. I had a life that was genuinely mine. I had stopped waiting for anything from my family, and in doing that, I had also stopped hurting quite so much. And then, on a Thursday afternoon in October, my father walked into Soleil. He didn't come alone. He brought my brother, my sister's husband, a guy I had met exactly twice at family events before everything fell apart, and a woman I had never seen before who turned out to be a paralegal who worked for a lawyer my father had apparently consulted. I was in the back doing inventory when my front desk manager, a sharp and unflappable woman named Kezia who had been with me for 4 years, came to find me with a look on her face that I had never seen before. "There's a man out front," she said. "He says he's your father. He asked for the VIP suite. He says it's important." I stood there for a second. Then I said, "Tell him I'll be out in 5 minutes." And I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. My father looked older. That was the first thing I noticed when I walked out. Older and smaller somehow, though he was still a big man. He was wearing a button-down shirt and his good boots, which meant he had dressed for this. My brother was standing slightly behind him with his arms crossed, and the brother-in-law was looking at his phone. The paralegal had a folder. I did not hug my father. I said, "I didn't know you were coming." He said, "We need to talk. Privately." I looked around at my spa, at the tea lounge full of clients. The receptionist desk where Kezia was watching with careful eyes. The hallway that led to the treatment rooms. I said, "We can use my office." We went to my office. I sat behind my desk. I did not offer anyone coffee. My father started by saying it was good to see me, and that I looked well, and that he had heard I was doing good things down here. I said thank you. I waited. Then he said he had a proposal. He said the landscaping company was going through some difficulty. He didn't specify what kind, but I would learn later that my brother had made some poor decisions about expanding into a market they weren't ready for, and that there were debts, and that he had been doing some thinking about the future. He said the family needed to pull together. He said that I had clearly been blessed with a good business mind, and that it wasn't right for all of us to be living separate lives when we were family. I said, "What is it that you're actually asking?" The paralegal opened the folder. It was a partnership agreement. My father had drafted a proposal, with a lawyer apparently, that would bring me into a new family business entity, the terms of which included a 40% stake being transferred from Soleil Wellness to this new entity, which my father and brother would jointly control. In exchange, I would receive what the document described as formalized acknowledgement of family partnership and a seat at the table in decisions about the landscaping company, which was, by this point, worth considerably less than my 2 spas. I read through the first 2 pages slowly. Then I looked at my father and said, "You want 40% of my business." He said it wasn't like that. He said it was about building something together as a family. He said there had been mistakes made on all sides and that this was a chance to move forward. My brother nodded, which was the most he had contributed to the conversation. I said, "What mistakes did I make?" Nobody answered that. My father's voice shifted then. Not angry yet, but edging toward the version of himself I remembered from that kitchen table. He said this was a serious offer, and he expected me to take it seriously. He said that family businesses were built on trust and shared investment, and that I hadn't been there for any of it. He said, and I want to be precise about this because I have thought about it many times since, "You didn't build this alone. You had help. The least you can do is help your family now." I asked him what help he thought I had received. He said, "We raised you. We gave you a foundation." I said, "You pulled my college fund and told me not to come back." The room got very quiet. My brother shifted his weight. The brother-in-law finally put his phone away. My father's jaw tightened, and he said that was a long time ago and that people made decisions they regretted, and this was about the future, not the past. I said, "I appreciate you coming all this way. I'm not going to sign this." My father leaned forward. This was the part I had been waiting for, though I hadn't let myself know I was waiting for it. He said that I should think carefully about what I was deciding. He said that property ownership in Nashville was complicated and that he had spoken to some people who knew some things about the building I was currently operating out of, and that there could be complications if I chose not to engage with this in good faith. I said, "What people?" He said there was a property management group he had connections with, and that they had certain relationships with buildings in this area, including some that were relevant to my current lease situation. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "Dad, who do you think owns this building?" He said he wasn't sure exactly, but he'd been told. I said, "I own this building. I purchased it 14 months ago. I own the building next door too. And the mixed-use property on Germantown that your contact probably mentioned, I have a majority stake in that as well." Whatever someone told you they could do with my lease, they were wrong. There is no landlord to call. There is no pressure point. There is no leverage. My father stared at me. My brother uncrossed his arms. The paralegal slowly closed the folder. I said it as calmly as I could, because I didn't want to perform anything in that moment. I wasn't trying to make him feel small. I was just telling him the truth. "You came here," I said, "to take something from someone you assumed was still the 19-year-old you sent away with nothing. I'm not her anymore. I haven't been her for a long time." My father tried twice more to redirect the conversation, first to the idea that we could restructure the offer, then to something more abstract about legacy and family bonds that I didn't fully follow. I listened to both. Then I stood up, which in my office means the meeting is over. I walked them out through the tea lounge. My clients were still there, murmuring over their cups. The diffuser was running the cedar and eucalyptus blend we used in the afternoons. Kezia watched from the desk without expression. At the door, my father stopped and looked at me. Not the negotiating look. Something else. Something older. He said, "I thought about you, over the years." I said, "I know." I didn't say anything else because there wasn't anything else to say that would have been honest and also kind. He walked out. My brother followed without making eye contact. The brother-in-law said, "Nice place," in a tone I couldn't read, and I said, "Thank you," because it is. Kezia came over after they were gone and stood next to me and said, quietly, "You okay?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Do you want me to cancel your 3 o'clock?" I said no. I went to the back, I washed my face, and I did my 3 o'clock, which was a consultation with a new client about redesigning her home office. I was present for every minute of it. I have found, over the years, that the best thing I can do when something hard happens is go back to work. Not to avoid it, just to remember that the work is real, and it's mine, and it's still there. My mother called me 3 days later. I answered, which surprised us both, I think. She said she had heard about the visit. She said she didn't know it was going to go the way it went. She said she was sorry, though it came out carefully, in pieces, like she was handing me something fragile and wasn't sure I would take it. I told her I appreciated her calling. I told her I wasn't ready for a full conversation yet, but that I was open to one eventually, on my timeline. She said she understood. I think she did. I don't have a tidy ending to give you, and I'm not going to invent one. My father and I are not reconciled. My brother has not reached out. The landscaping company filed for a restructuring arrangement 6 months after that visit, which I found out about through a Google alert I had set up a long time ago for the company name. Because some part of me had always been paying attention, what I can tell you is what I know now that I didn't know at 19. I know that the people who are supposed to be your foundation sometimes aren't, and that this fact, as brutal as it is, does not disqualify you from building something real. I know that money and control are sometimes the only language certain people have for love, and that understanding that doesn't mean you have to accept it. I know that you can grieve a family that is still technically alive, that you can miss something that was never quite what it should have been, and that this particular kind of grief is real even when people around you don't have a name for it. I know that building a business from scratch when you have nothing is the hardest and most clarifying thing I have ever done. I know that Kezia and Margaret, who believed in me early, and the clients who drove across town because they said Soleil felt different from other places, these people are my people, chosen and kept. And I know that the girl who sat at that kitchen table at 19 and said that's not what I want was right. She was right about all of it. She just had to go a very long way to prove it, mostly to herself. That's the part I think about most, actually. Not the look on my father's face when I told him I owned the building, not the moment the paralegal closed the folder. The part I think about is Kezia asking if I was okay and realizing, in a way that felt new and solid and real, that I was. There's a version of this story where I walk out of that office feeling victorious, and I want to be honest. Part of me did. But the feeling that stayed longer, the one that was still there when I drove home that night, wasn't triumph. It was something quieter, something closer to grief that had finally finished moving through me. What happened in that room was the result of choices. Mine. My father's. Years of them layered on top of each other like sediment. My father chose to take the money, chose to issue an ultimatum, chose, years later, to walk back in with a folder and an assumption. And what I've come to understand is that those choices didn't just happen to me. They shaped me, the way pressure shapes something over time. You either crack or you become harder and clearer than you were before. I chose the second thing, though I didn't always know that's what I was doing. I think about the integrity it took to keep going those first few years. Not the grand kind. Not the kind that makes a good speech. But the small, daily kind. Choosing not to cut corners when I was exhausted. Choosing to pay vendors on time even when it was tight. Choosing to treat every single client at that front desk like their experience mattered, because it did. And because I knew from the inside what it felt like to be treated like you didn't. That's the thing about building something honestly. It takes a long time, and almost nobody is watching while you do it, and you have to be okay with that. I had to be okay with that. The intelligence that saved me wasn't the kind I learned in the classroom, though I'm grateful for that too. It was the kind that comes from paying attention. From watching how a business actually runs at the ground level before you try to run one yourself. From reading a lease agreement carefully. From knowing when my father made his threat, exactly what he did and didn't know. Information is a form of protection, and I had spent years acquiring mine while my father assumed I was still the girl who didn't know anything. And then there's the part that's hardest to talk about, which is the sheer stubbornness it took to keep going when it would have been so much easier to collapse. Not just in the practical sense. The double shifts, the loan applications, the years of saying no to things I wanted because I was building towards something else. But in the emotional sense, the work of deciding over and over that what happened to me at 19 was not the final word on what my life would be. That took everything I had on some days. I won't pretend otherwise. What my father saw when he walked into Soleil was a building, a business, a woman in a good blazer behind a clean desk. What he didn't see, what he couldn't see, was the decade of unglamorous, unwitnessed, unacknowledged effort that made that room possible. Kezia, who showed up every day and made the front desk feel like a warm welcome. Margaret, who believed in me before there was anything visible to believe in. Every client who drove across town and came back again. That's what he was asking me to hand over 40% of. Not just a business. Everything I had become in the making of it. I'm not angry at him anymore. I spent a lot of time working on that, and I think it's real now, not just something I tell myself. But I am clear. And clarity, I've learned, is worth more than almost anything else you can build.